let's back up a little bit because I know that you wanted to be a writer since I think you said age 7 in the book. It was the only thing you wanted to be, and the goal was you wanted to be rich and
You
live
bet.
forever through your books, which obviously is in the process of happening. We're not ruling anything out,
Right.
but
Any minute.
is that at what point did that when that didn't instantly materialize, because the podcast wasn't around then to
Right. We're born yet.
to raise you up. When that didn't initially materialize, and this became a lot of work as well as a lot of fun, what kept you writing, and what keeps you writing now?
It I stopped writing for, well, okay, I'll just tell you my weird little slave girl story if that sort of started it. I wrote a novel when I was 11, and it was called Slave Girl. And this was in the 50s, and with all of the things that were going on, integration and all this stuff on television, that was very upsetting to me. And my little kid brain morphed that into a story that was called Slave Girl, and it was about a little girl escaping by underground railroad from the south to the north, a black girl. And only the problem was I thought it was a subway. And so I had her boarding the subway, in Atlanta, Georgia, dining cars, sleeping cars, the whole 9 yards, and then coming up in New York City free at last. And so I wrote it all down, and I made little pictures, and I had a cover, and I sent it off to a publisher in New York that I'd found in a library book, the address in the library book. And of course it was rejected because, well, I mean, because, but shortly after we got to the unit in social studies, and I found out that the Underground Railroad was not a subway. And I was so embarrassed this is the God's honest truth. I was so embarrassed that I didn't write for 20 years. And then when I was teaching high school and I was in my mid-20s, a kid said to me, how was there ever anything else you wanted to be? And I always had this idea that you had to say the truth. If you were a teacher, you can, I don't like adults who don't tell the truth to kids. So I said, well, I used to want to be a writer. And then he said, well, why aren't you? And of course, I could only say, because I'm too scared. And then I knew I had to try, because if I was asking kids to do what I was asking them to do, which is to, go after their dreams, didn't I have to do that too? So that was what really got me going. And by then I think I still thought that I would publish, and that I, would eventually have a career, and I would make money from writing and all that. And I was lucky. I published my first novel pretty quickly. With a New York publisher. It got a starred review in Publishers Weekly. It got a lot of good reviews, but it didn't sell very well. And, pretty soon it was off the shelves. And so that was, my first clue about the way things really were. And, to shorten the story a bit, I worked on a second novel for a really long time with this editor, and it just didn't work. And, she finally had to let it go. And I understood that. It eventually became a young adult novel, which was Stranded in Harmony. But in any case, I went for 12 years between my first and second novel, which was really difficult. And, I came to the point where I thought, I don't know which is worse, whether, when people stop asking you, when is your next novel coming out, or when they stop asking you, that you don't, people would say for a long time, well, when's that next one coming out? And yeah, it was embarrassing because I didn't know. And then people stopped, and they, I guess they just assumed I wasn't going to do it again. And so it was hard. And so I was teaching during that time at Broad Ripple High School in Indianapolis, which was my greatest work ever. I loved that job, and I loved those kids. And they were what I had, and I told them that process was what mattered, and that you had to be patient, and that it wasn't about anything other than that. And so, again, it was the teenager kind of thing that made me keep going, because I felt like if I was demanding that of them, I had to demand it of myself. And so then eventually I published my second novel, which was Wish You Were Here. And again, I mean, it got great reviews. It was on the best books for young adults. So was Stranded in Harmony a couple of years later. But no, it sort of didn't go anywhere. And I have had the worst luck in publishing. I really have. For some reason, those two books never went into paperback, and they should have, based on, just the fact that they were award books and whatever, that for some reason they didn't go into paperback. It was Hyperion. They were new at that time, and they just, they couldn't figure out who they wanted to be. So that was really weird. But since then, I've published fairly regularly, maybe 3-4 years. It takes me a long time. But no book has ever hit. Every book I've ever done has gotten, good reviews wherever. And some of the YAs have received various awards, but it just has never panned out, for whatever reason. I think a lot of it is, frankly, a crapshoot. You don't know why things happen. Sometimes they happen because of connections, and I don't really have a lot of those. So maybe it's partly that. And maybe it's my karma, maybe it's just that this is what I'm meant to deal with, that this is my test. Am I gonna keep doing this no matter what? And the answer is yes, that whatever happens, I'm going to do it, because I feel worse when I don't write than when I do write. So, whatever happens to what happens afterwards, it'll just, it's just what it is. So I'm now hoping for posthumous fame and wealth. Could happen.
Well, that's a given. That's a story I tell myself, is the moment I'm dead, my books will go on to become the greatest, most successful things that have ever been. There will be thousands of movies, and if for some reason that's not true, I won't know about it. It's fine.
You won't know. So let's just plan on that.
I know that obviously you're the only writer that has ever encountered difficulty in publishing. But for those authors who are listening who might currently be encountering some sort of difficulty along the way, what kept you going through that? How did you deal with that frustration to put that aside and still find joy in writing despite all the pain it was also simultaneously bringing you?
Well, I do love to write. I mean, I feel better when I write. My life is better when I write. I have a tendency towards depression just as a human being, and I get that less when I'm writing. It's amazing to me if I haven't written for a while and I'm really down, and I just even if I start writing in my journal, I feel better. So over the years, I've learned that about myself. And so I make myself do it. I do it. And I think people say, oh, I can't write if I'm not inspired. Yeah, you can. It'll take you longer, because make the words come out a little bit at a time, but you won't be able to tell the difference in the end between the stuff that came when you felt inspired and the stuff that you had to really work over. They'll be the same. And so fine, just do it, and people say, I don't have time, but yeah, you do, with the exception possibly of people with brand new babies or something. But generally, turn off your television. I just always say, choose writing. When you have 3 things that you could do, and writing's one of them, choose writing. And that may mean that you give up other things that you enjoy. You might do that instead of watching a movie or going shopping or whatever things you like. But it's a matter of choice. It really is. It comes down to that. I saw this in some dumb magazine years ago, but it said, discipline is remembering what you want. And I think that's a great way of thinking of discipline, because usually discipline is something people tell us we should do. They say, you need to have more discipline, at which point you immediately don't want it because someone told you to have it. But if you think discipline is remembering what you want, it's a whole other way of, thinking about it. So there you go. And, the other thing with the novels too, is that, this is kind of the good news and the bad news, but they take a long time. So, it's not like you're it's not like you're facing the publication question every day, maybe like a short story writer does or something like that. It's periodic misery as opposed to daily misery. So I guess that's good.
Even on the days when you feel ridiculously inspired and like, this is the greatest writing day ever, and you write some tremendous word count, you're still gonna have to revise that. You've still created work for future you.
Yeah. And that's why the stuff that's hard and the stuff that's easy ends up sounding the same, because you have to revise it all. And when you revise with the same process. So it all comes out, kind of so that it's seamless. And it's one of the reasons why revision is so important. You want that seamlessness in your work.
Something I try and hammer on, maybe to too hard a degree. I'm sure esteemed audience, faithful esteemed audience members have heard me say this before. But something I open my fiction workshops with is, if you come here and you paid money to hear me talk about writing, that's going to happen. But during the day, if at some point I can convince you to stop writing, if you can see yourself being happier doing something else with your time, then go do that thing. Be free. I consider that to be a
I
worthy
agree.
use of your time and money. You don't have to worry about this writing thing anymore. If you're not going to stop, then do it right. Get to it.
I think you're absolutely right. When I was teaching, sometimes parents would say, "Oh, I hope you'll encourage my son or daughter to be a writer. They're so talented." And I would think, sometimes they were not as talented as their parents thought. Sometimes they were. But in any case, what I always said to them was, if your son or daughter really wants to be a writer and does the work to be a writer, I will be with them forever. But they might not want that. And you need to think about that too. And I would say, sort of say the same thing you say to people, to the kids that I taught. If you don't really want to do it, there are lots of other things that you can do that probably will bring you, well, not necessarily more satisfaction, but will be more easy to be satisfying. Like, there's no ladder in this. In other kinds of careers, you start at a certain place, and depending on how hard you work and how smart you are, and sometimes who you know, but not always, you can predict that you will get to a certain level, that you can rise, and it's all about rising, corporate world, legal world, whatever. But in the world of the arts, it's not like that there is no ladder. And nobody knows who's going to get to the top. I mean, it could be James Patterson, one of the worst writers ever in the world. And who knows
Ooh,
why?
bold words
I'm
from Barbara
sorry,
Shoup.
but it's true. I mean, it's absolutely true. He is not a good writer. His stuff does not hang together, yet he is, he's as rich as God. So who knows, and you can't get angry about that. You just have to accept it. You cannot dwell on it. If you do, it'll make you crazy and depressed, and that doesn't help. So you write for yourself. I don't write for an audience. I write for myself. I don't know how to write for an audience. I write the things that seem possible to me and are in some way related to something that troubles me in my personal life or the world in general, mostly my personal life. And then, I find a way to look at it sideways through a story, which is generally not not a story about exactly what I'm troubled with, but somehow it all comes into play. So that's me. And you have to decide what kind of writer you want to be. If you want to make a living at writing, there are ways that you can do it. One of my daughters is a terrific writer, and she makes a living as a freelance writer, nonfiction stuff. And she really loves it. She writes good books, and she's not beating her head on the wall like I am. But that's not the kind of book I want to write, or that I even feel like I can write. I write what I can, and it seems like the only thing that I can do.
I am a James Patterson apologist. We won't go into that today, but I think he absolutely serves a vital function. I've got a couple of books of his that I'll pick a bone with, but that's another discussion.
Yeah. No, people can do what they want, but most people who are writers and know about writing will look at his books, and they will, if you talk about them in terms of craft, that's a different thing. But if you enjoy them, cool. I think there should be every kind of book in the world, and they're great escape fiction for some people. People like it, but for me as a writer, if I open a book like that, and not only his, it's like it's like fingernails on a chalkboard, because it just it's not doing what I think it ought to do. So we'll just leave him behind.
Fair enough. My wife has this great term that I've taken to using. It's a literary Twinkie, and for me, that's most James Patterson novels. Goodbye, brain. I won't need you for this. Let's have some fun.
Definitely a place for those books.
If I'm looking for passages that I'm highlighting, say this is the finest sentence I've ever read, I'm probably not going to find it there.
Probably not there.
But I will maybe find a good time.